This woman was accused of personally taking part in and being directly responsible for the extermination of more than 500,000 people. And the story of the future nightmare of Auschwitz began, no matter how cynical it sounds, almost identical to the stories of other maniac guards. Some people say that war does not have a woman's face, but this is not a universal rule. Sadly, women's faces can sometimes represent not only war, but also war crimes. The blonde devil of Auschwitz, Irma Grese, was beautiful. Her boss and patroness, Maria Mandel, is rather pretty according to standards of the time. And besides, she sincerely loved music. And Mandel also liked to knock out the jaws with one blow and throw live babies into the ovens of crematoriums. How can it be combined in one person and a woman, after all? Let's take a deeper look into the issue. You're watching X-War History. Let's continue this episode. An unknown beginning. Little is known about Mandel's early life, because then she was absolutely nothing extraordinary, except that she was almost a compatriot of the Führer. She was born on January 10, 1912 in Münzkirchen, a small Austrian town. It seems that her father was a shoemaker, that being, the family did not live in poverty but was not rich. There was at least one other daughter within the family. The girl definitely received a mediocre education and didn't have any decent qualifications. It's sometimes claimed that she has only completed primary school. At the same time, her mental abilities were pretty normal. Colleagues in the SS later characterized her as a truly intelligent woman. Though there is no information why everything turned out this way, due to family circumstances or Maria herself did not want to study. It is also unclear why she didn't marry anyone, or whether she had any personal life at all until the late 1930s. Outwardly, she was a rather beautiful woman, according to her contemporaries, but it was purely externally. However, Maria did not want to sit under the wing of her parents. In her youth, she managed to live in Switzerland and then moved to Germany. She worked at the post office, sometimes a position quite insignificant in a certain Swiss private office is also mentioned in some documents. One thing is certain, Mandel didn't demonstrate any special talents in the service and performed the simplest, unskilled and poorly paid work. This is the image of her early life. Therefore, it can be assumed that initially the reason for her decision to join the SS retinue, that is, auxiliary women's units, was a primitive desire to earn more and take a higher step in the social hierarchy. There is nothing to be done about it. In the late 1930s in Germany, an SS man or woman was definitely considered a more respectable person than an average postman. In addition, the uniform is beautiful, prestigious, and all of it was accompanied by a number of benefits. In the SS retinue. Maria Mandel joined the SS retinue in the autumn of 1938. At that time, there was no mass need for female guards for concentration camps. This need arose after the outbreak of war. But Mandel made a career in this field from the very beginning. On October 15, 1938, she began her work in the Lichtenburg camp, near Bretten. This camp was not initially large and didn't have great prospects. It held Roma people from German lands, German opponents of Nazism, as well as sexual perverts and even former Nazi troops after the defeat of the SA in the Night of the Long Knives. But gradually the prisoners were exterminated or transferred to other camps, and some of them were even released. Therefore, by the time Maria Mandel appeared in Lichtenburg, it was in fact a small colony for lesbians. The guards there passed a probationary period and mastered the profession. In a small camp, it was convenient. Mandel was recognized as a promising worker, and on May 15, 1939, immediately after the final closure of Lichtenburg, she was transferred to a really serious, in terms of hierarchy, place, Ravensbrück. It was in this camp that she began to grow rapidly in her career. The SS retinue did not receive real SS officer ranks, but its members could hold positions corresponding to officers, and even of a fairly high rank. This is what happened to Mandel. She received such high appointments that the woman is even sometimes called SS Obersturmbannführer, Lieutenant Colonel. In Ravensbrück camp, Mandel began to act as a mentor to young people and trained a number of valuable personnel. Johanna Bormann, Irma Grese, Theresa Brandl, Margot Drexel were her students, and their bloody fame was not far behind the glory of their mentor, if not surpassed it. In March of 1942, Mandel became the senior warden of Ravensbrück, and on October 7th of the same year, she was transferred to Auschwitz, As the head of the entire women's department, there were national branches which were essentially separate camps, and we must note, not small ones. She took her favorite students with her, also mainly to leadership positions. Maria Mandel could order the murder of any female prisoner who dared to just throw a look at the SS Obersturmbannführer. The Beast of Auschwitz personally approved the lists of prisoners to be exterminated. When counting, it was thanks to her approvals that more than 500,000 women and children went to the gas chambers. For shock work in the field of destruction and services to the Reich, Mandel was awarded the Military Merit Cross, 2nd degree. But Mandel didn't just sign papers. One of her pastimes was breeding so-called Jewish pets. The woman selected several Jews who were obliged to carry out all her commands, run errands, behave like animals, and so on. When the pets got bored, Mandel sent them to the gas chamber. Mandel did the same with the children she liked. There is a known case when she took in her arms a small child who ran out of the ranks of the condemned. The merciless woman washed him, changed his clothes, took him everywhere with her, but a week later, the toy made her bored and was sent to the gas chamber without pity. Mandel earned the nickname Music Lover for the fact that she formed an orchestra of Jewish musicians. The unfortunate women were actually sincerely lucky, since Mandel took care of her orchestra and even allocated a special barrack for these people. But the cynicism of the use of music was that the orchestra was obliged to play grandiose, uplifting music for those who went to the gas chambers before sending prisoners to work and when returning from work. In 1944, Mandel was transferred from Auschwitz to the position of head of the Mulhdorf camp, one of the many branches of Dachau, where she served until May 1945. However, the peak of her career was still Auschwitz. At Ravensbrück and Auschwitz, other guards revered Maria Mandel as a dedicated and conscientious worker. Her superiors also had a high opinion of her, and not only promoted her, but also considered her worthy of a prestigious reward. In general, service in the camps was considered difficult, and moreover, of great importance for ensuring security. Thus, the awarding of the high-ranking guard Mandel with the Military Merit Cross, yes, for military, 2nd class without swords, this was taken for granted. Many employees of concentration camps had awards of this rank. Knock out the jaw with one blow. But a simple list of duty stations, awards, and titles does not explain why Maria Mandel was recognized as one of the most odious Nazi female criminals, and there were definitely reasons for this. By definition, female guards were used mainly to work with women and children, and Maria Mandel liked her profession. Her duties included conducting reviews and roll calls, assigning prisoners to work and sending them for medical experiments, and compiling lists of candidates for murder and ensuring their transportation to the gas chambers. Apart from that, the warden had to personally maintain order and discipline and carry out punishments, and the camp commander had to impose these punishments. Mandel, on the other hand, always sought to overfulfill the plan. Even as the head of the camp, she didn't hesitate to personally supervise the loading of the doomed to be sent to execution, to personally select candidates for death directly from the crowd, and even personally beat those in whom she even caught a hint of disobedience. Back in Lichtenberg, Mandel mastered an almost professional boxing punch. At one time, she could not only break a person's nose with her fist, but also knock out a jaw, and she liked to demonstrate this skill. Her SS colleagues approved this skill very much. In Ravensbrück, she willingly carried out punishments in the form of public flogging. The guards liked to do it for show. In Auschwitz, she herself could order a person to be flogged to death if he dared to even raise his eyes to her. It wasn't enough for Mandel to be present when prisoners were loaded onto trucks to be sent to the gas chambers. She also beat the doomed, so that they would hurry to death. She also liked the process of selecting doomed co-workers for the brothel that existed in Auschwitz. In Ravensbrück, Maria Mandel introduced a kind of weakness test for prisoners. Those who didn't pass it were recognized as too weak for work and immediately became candidates for the gas industry. The test consisted of jumping over a high log. Children and women with babies enjoyed her special form of love, or rather hate. She sent them to execution in the first place, and preferably separately, first taking away the children from their mothers. On her orders, in Auschwitz, they practiced burning babies in crematoriums alive. It is unknown what was the core reason for this horrendous act. In December 1942, Mandel decided to arrange a bath day for prisoners in Auschwitz. It looked like this. The prisoners were forced to strip naked and wait in the cold first for their turn to the showers, and then to be sent back to the barracks while still wet. Andreas Larenjakos, originally from Italy although Greek by nationality, a former young prisoner of Auschwitz, recalled how in November 1944, during the transfer of children from one subcamp to another, one child was missing from the final roll call. Then Mandel, with the help of Teresa Brandl, lined up all the children outside, and it was freezing in November, and left them standing. The little prisoners stood for almost 12 hours, from 1 in the morning to noon. And there are many similar episodes in the biography of Maria Mandel. She's recognized as involved in one way or another in the death of about 500,000 children and women in concentration camps. Perverted behavior. Maria Mandel also had perverted habits that were not directly related to her duties as a warden, although they stemmed from them. In particular, she liked to turn individual prisoners into a kind of pets, or court fools popular with medieval feudal lords. The chosen favorite one, sometimes several at the same time, was exempt from all types of camp work, received decent food and clothing. For this, he was obliged to carry out small personal errands of the overseer, from the category of give and bring, or simply be with her all the time, accompanying her wherever she went. Sometimes they put a collar on him and took him on a leash. Yes, driven by bullying, hunger, and unbearable living conditions, people often perceived such mercy, if you can say so, as a chance. But there was no chance, because Maria Mandel was not at all inclined to get attached to her animals. If they bothered her or annoyed her in any way, then they were immediately sent to the gas chamber. The French Jewish singer Fania Fenelon, a survivor of Auschwitz, described one such case in detail in her memoirs. Then, from the crowd of newly delivered prisoners, a very small boy ran out literally under Mandel's feet, no more than 2 years old. Witnesses who already knew the temper of the warden expected immediate murder or some other atrocity. But despite horrible expectations, Mandel quite peacefully took the child in her arms and took him with her. His mother was immediately sent to the gas chamber. Most likely, the unfortunate woman in the last minutes of her life consoled herself with the thought that at least her son would live. Yes, Mandel dressed the boy however she wished, took him everywhere with her, and kind of treated him affectionately. But this lasted just 5 days. Then the boy got bored and followed his mother. But the main non-work interest of Maria Mandel was music, and this hobby of hers also received a perverted, terrible embodiment in the concentration camp. Mandel's cynical passion. Indeed, there is information that Maria Mandel was a real music lover, and she became one long before she joined the SS retinue. And in her position as a camp warden and head of the camp, she saw an excellent opportunity to pamper herself, and completely free of charge. Back in Ravensbrück, on the initiative of Mandel, the camp orchestra was created. Having moved to Auschwitz, she didn't want to live without music here either. The Auschwitz Orchestra was established in May 1943. Initially, all women who had at least some idea of the business were taken into it. Most of them were music teachers. But then Mandel gave the go-ahead for a purposeful search among the newly entered imprisoned musicians, real and professional ones. For the sake of replenishing the orchestra, even Jewish women were left alive. The team also included singers, and one of them was the already mentioned Fania Fenelon. The orchestra members were given a separate barracks, provided with a good, of course in comparison with other prisoners' diet, and a more comfortable uniform, different from all the others. They were even allowed to wear normal women's underwear, which other victims of Auschwitz did not even dare to dream of. The orchestra didn't do any camp work. It only rehearsed and performed. They had to play in the morning and in the evening, before sending prisoners to work and when they returned. Sometimes it was necessary to speed up the loading of those doomed to execution with a brisk march, or to silence their complaints. The orchestra also played for the camp guards in the highest ranks, on some occasions or according to individual requests. Mandel called the leader of the collective, Polish music teacher Zofia Czakowska, exclusively Tchaikovskaya, thereby laughing at her that she was familiar with the work of the composer banned in the Third Reich. Being in the camp provided Czakowska with mental problems, but she did a lot to protect and save her words. Among other things, she had to communicate regularly and politely with Maria Mandel. If Mandel was pleased with the work of the orchestra, she could treat its members well. She was one of their main customers. She came to the barracks and demanded to play for her personally. However, If she did not like something, she could attack the orchestra members with beatings right during the rehearsal. If this reprisal did not satisfy her, the guilty woman was expelled from the orchestra. This consequently meant immediate dispatch to the gas chamber. At the same time, the women were well aware of who their admirers were. In addition to Mandel, the commandant of the entire camp complex, Huss, and the notorious Dr. Mengele liked to listen to the orchestra and singers, and what kind of events marked their performances. But they still couldn't help their doomed fellow people in any way, and being in the orchestra gave them a chance to live. It must be said that most of the Auschwitz orchestra members survived the regime. It should be mentioned, the torture for them was not only life in conditions of constant mortal threat, but also the realization of what their art was used for. Even the music itself became a mockery. Fanny Fenelon said that she was literally tortured by singing an aria from Madame Butterfly, which was Mandel and Huss' favorite part, and they demanded it again and again. Anita Lasker from Wrocław, the future founder of the English Chamber Orchestra, also hated Schumann's Dreams. This piece was arranged by her for cello and orchestra. It was written originally for piano, and its endless performance was demanded by Mengele. But these were, so to speak, individual requests, and for the most part the orchestra played various folk songs and marches. These were supposed to be more and more cheerful major melodies, and this was also a kind of perverted mockery. The end of the story. Unlike many colleagues, Maria Mandel remained in her post until the very end. She fled from Mulhdorf literally in the last days of the war. At first, the determined lady hid in the Alps, but then went to Mönchskirchen, counting on the help of her parents. The parents should accept her the way she is, she thought. And then something unusual happened. The old Mandel family flatly refused to hide their daughter, but her sister, whom Maria managed to get to, agreed to do it. Therefore, the warden was arrested only on August 10, 1945. This was done by the American authorities, and the identity of Mandel was established by them, and the monster of Auschwitz was desired by the Polish authorities. Mandel's value from the point of view of the American intelligence services tended to pretty much zero. She didn't know and couldn't do anything special. Therefore, the passionate desire of the Poles to get her at their disposal was fulfilled. In November 1946, the Americans satisfied the Polish request. A year later, on November 24, 1947, the so-called First Auschwitz trial began in Krakow, at which 40 people from among the camp leadership and auxiliary services were tried. There were few women among them: overseers Dons, Lechert, Orlowski, Brandl, and the manager of the women's department, Maria Mandel. Testimony was also given by women and men from the camp orchestra, and in general, there was so much evidence of the guilt of many defendants in the case that it would have been enough for several death sentences, like in the Middle Ages. But nevertheless, the tribunal of the new People's Poland turned out to be more than humane. One of the defendants was acquitted altogether. Some received only minor prison terms. However, the activities of 23 people were accused of being serious. They were sentenced to immediate death. Among them were two women, Therese Brandl and Maria Mandel, student and mentor. The verdict was handed down on December 22nd. Before its execution, two convicts managed to replace the execution with life imprisonment. After 10 years, they were amnestied, but not Maria Mandel. There is no information in regard to whether she asked for a pardon or not. She was hanged on January 24, 1948 in the prison of Montelupik, where she had been held. The last person with whom Mandel had to communicate was Therese Brandl. The condemned shared the same cell. The execution was not public, unlike many other executions of Nazi criminals in the early post-war years. For this reason, no details of this procedure have been preserved. There is only a legend that Mandel's last words were "Long live Poland," but it's not clear why on earth she would say that. Poland was a place of work for her, and nothing more, except as a last possible mockery. It's unlikely that her relatives regretted her much. As for other connections, it's only known about Mandel's affair with the SS builder, who was engaged in the construction and maintenance of crematoria, Karl Bischoff, during his service in Ravensbrück. He also loved music, but it's unlikely that the man loved Mandel even that much as he loved music. The bodies of executed Nazi criminals, in principle, were not supposed to be given to relatives or friends. Therefore, the fate of Maria Mandel's body was the same as that of others like her. It ended up in the anatomical theater. And there, Mandel finally served a good cause. Her body helped to train future doctors. And finally, everything ended in the by-waste furnace. And in this, you can see the highest justice. The one that sent 500,000 people to crematoriums without regret didn't escape the same fate. An ordinary woman in general who loved music. That's all Maria Mandel, without ideas of Nazism in her head. One could say that this is Hitlerism, and only this turned her into a monster involved in 500,000 deaths. It can be possible, but there's one but. It's well known. Hitlerism failed to cope with the reason and conscience of those who really did not want to yield to it. This means that Maria Mandel didn't really resist Nazi influence. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and leave a like, and we see you later in our upcoming episodes on X War History.